Let us discuss the situation along the line of contact. We have a large amount of footage and information about Iskander and Tornado-S strikes on concentrations of Ukrainian formations. Let us start with the northwestern part of the locality of Dnipro. As early as yesterday, Ukrainian sources began to spread information that something terrible and tragic had happened near Dnipro. The Iskander strike destroyed the headquarters or training center of the 157th Separate Mechanized Brigade. Today, the footage of objective control has appeared. Let's take a look at them. On this footage we can see a large military camp. Barracks and people are visible. Several dozens, if not hundreds of Ukrainian soldiers can be clearly seen moving from one part of the camp to another. Sources later said it was a training camp for FPV drone operators. Other footage shows how the camp was completely wiped out using an Iskander and with a cluster warhead. The camp was destroyed. Separate sources, including Ukrainian sources, confirmed that the Ukrainian armed forces lost up to 150 people in this strike. It is difficult to say how many of them were drone operators, but the losses are definitely significant. It is also worth noting that this is not the first case of a targeted strike on the deployment sites and training centers of FPV drone operators. Let me remind you that on February 26, just a few days ago, in the same direction, but to the west of Zaporizhzhia, in the course of reconnaissance activities, another location of Ukrainian units was identified, where there were also FPV drone operators undergoing training. This location was also struck. At the time, sources reported 80 to 85 Ukrainian armed forces personnel losses. To summarize, in 2 strikes, the armed forces of Ukraine lost about 235 people. But this is not the end of the story. Let me remind you of another case, which took place on February 26th to 27th. The situation here is similar, but the object of the attack was not a training camp, but possibly the deployment of a unit of FPV drone operators in the Bryansk area. The Ukrainian armed forces may have been planning strikes deep into the territory of the Russian Federation, or were preparing for counterattacks or a counteroffensive in order to slow down the Russian army's advance in the Sudzha area. In the course of reconnaissance activities, this unit was identified, and the Iskander strike completely eliminated the entire group. Thus, from February 26 to March 2, the AFU lost up to 300 personnel, most of whom were operators of FPV drones, only from Iskander strikes, according to objective control footage. These are very serious losses for the AFU, as drone operators are a key resource in a modern conflict. With such losses, there is a high probability that the front could collapse due to a lack of operators capable of stopping an offensive. In addition, there are reports of strikes on various targets. In Odessa, there are reports of strikes on foreign mercenaries or instructors who were probably training surface drone operators. Presumably, their training was supported by the United Kingdom. It is also known about strikes in the South Donbass direction, on howitzers and several warehouses. The Russian side is now actively working to destroy key enemy facilities. Let me remind you that the other day there was information that in late February and early March there is an extremely high probability that North Korea will provide additional supplies of missiles to the Russian Federation. Perhaps this is the explanation for such dense and massive strikes across the entire territory of Ukraine. The Russian side does not appear to be counting the missiles, which may indicate that the new shipment has indeed reached the front line. Now let's move on to the line of contact. Let me remind you that no significant advancement has been recorded over the past 24 hours. In fact, there has been none. However, some cartographers, including neutral sources, note a slight advance by the Russian army in the area of Zhuravka. This information confirms already available data from various sources, and today it was officially confirmed by reliable sources after careful verification. We see that at the moment the Russian army is trying to advance towards the locality of Yanikivka, striking from the direction of Sverdlikov and Darin Nikolaev towards Highway 07. Moving on to the southern Bulge. A large amount of video footage is coming in from here. A temporary deployment point was struck on Gavo. The exact date of the strike is hard to determine, but footage was released today. In general, I would like to remind you that we have repeatedly drawn attention to this section of the front, as the greatest amount of footage of objective control of the use of FAB 3000 and FAB 1500 comes from there. This entire area, a small pocket from the Syol River to the state border with Ukraine, is being actively leveled and cleared. Recently, an important video of the destruction of pontoon crossings near the village of Gornal was received. This confirms that strikes are being carried out not only on temporary deployment sites, but also on logistical facilities. Today, footage of multiple rocket launcher strikes on the same village of Gornal, located along the border with Russia and Ukraine, was also published. This may indicate preparations for a resumption of hostilities in the area. However, it is reported that warm weather with plus temperatures is expected in the near future. This means there is a high probability that any offensive operations and movements on this section of the front will be temporarily postponed due to the thaw. According to Ukrainian sources, the warming weather will cause the snow to start melting, resulting in mud and slush, and making movement across the fields impossible. The Russian army's recent successful advances were made possible by frosts as low as -20°C, when the ground was frozen solid. These conditions made it possible to establish control over Lebedevka and advance into Sumy Oblast, to Zuravka, and to occupy the village of Novinkoy. These achievements allowed the Russian side to get close to Route 07. Now there is no need to move further, it is possible to consolidate on the achieved positions. The distance to the highway is from 5 to 8 kilometers, which is enough for effective control. The Ukrainian side will also not be able to move fully along the road because of the thaw. According to even Ukrainian sources, Route 07 is under full fire control of the Russian Federation. Individual experts report that every third vehicle, regardless of its reservation, is destroyed while traveling along this road. Losses while traveling on the highway alone amount to 33%, and it is likely that the real figures are even higher. Thus, in the next 3 weeks, the Russian side has accomplished all its tasks and can now observe the enemy's actions. Now let's move on to the North Ring direction. Sources continue to publish footage of objective monitoring of strikes on the Ukrainian armed forces' forward positions. Perhaps we are already talking about former forward positions. A little further south, in the Gusilov direction, pro-Russian sources report an expansion of the zone of control between Novaya Kruglyakivka and the village of Zaporizhzhia. Here there is a significant difference between the maps of different experts. Some pro-Russian cartographers claim that this pocket between Zaporizhzhia and Novaya Kruglyakivka is already fully under the control of the Russian Federation, but no confirming video footage has been received yet. This may indeed be the case, but additional evidence is needed for final confirmation. Next, we're heading towards Lyman. There's a lot of important news coming in. Some pro-Russian experts note the complete clearing of the pocket between Yampol and Tarskoy, indicating that fighting may soon begin for the last settlement on the Russian side of the Zarabets River. Pro-Ukrainian sources are sounding the alarm. Today, some military analysts claim that Russian drones have begun to fly as far as Lyman, and strikes are already being carried out on Ukrainian armed forces' positions on the territory of this small town. This may indicate the beginning of the third battle for Lyman. Next, we move on to Bakhmut and Terezk, from where many important reports are also coming in. The Russian army is gradually preparing a bridgehead for a further assault towards Konstantinovka. More and more engineering structures are being built by the Russian side in the area of responsibility and logistics around Bakhmut, Ivanovskoye, and Chasov Yar. Practically the entire direction is being covered with protective nets so that when the decisive assault begins, there will be maximum cover for the equipment from the strikes of Ukrainian FPV drones. The only really effective means of defense against drones, confirmed by combat practice, are multi-kilometer tunnels covered with netting, which prevent drones from attacking Russian units. This is exactly the picture that can now be observed in the area of Bakhmut, Ivanovskoye, and Chasov Yar. The Russian side is actively constructing such tunnels, creating safe logistical routes ahead of the upcoming offensive. It appears that the offensive may involve the use of a significant amount of equipment. Next, we move to the Pokrovskoye direction, where there is high activity in the southern part of the settlement. There are strikes with FABs, and the impression is that the Russian army may try to gain a foothold on the southern outskirts without advancing further at this stage. This is probably just a reconnaissance before more decisive action. In the South Donbass direction, the Russian army continues to mop up this village and the entire front in this area. It is quite possible that something is expected here, and the situation will change in the near future. This issue will probably be resolved closer to March 6th, on the eve of the Summit of European States. In the Zaporizhzhia direction, there is important information concerning the Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant. Today, for the first time since the beginning of the special military operation, IAEA inspectors rotated through the territory of the Russian Federation. Normally, this procedure is carried out through Ukrainian-controlled Zaporizhzhia. First, the inspectors receive authorization from the Ukrainian side, then head to Vasilivka, where a change of guard takes place, after which the Russian side escorts them to the plant. However, today for the first time the rotation took place without Ukraine's participation. We recall that in early February, the Ukrainian side disrupted the rotation by attacking the IAEA inspectors with FPV drones, artillery, and mortars. The last two attempts at rotation also failed, which may indicate that the Ukrainian side is not interested in this process. Today, however, the procedure was completed without incident, which may have thwarted some plans for provocations. In general, there is high activity in the Zaporizhzhia direction. Footage of FAB strikes on the AFU's forward positions, both in the area of Guliapol and in Orkhov, is being published. The front here has been significantly revitalized. The activity is much higher than what was observed 6 months ago. That's all though, dear friends. Thank you for watching us. Subscribe to the channel and put likes. All the best to you.